Antietam was a Civil War battle that is still chilling to contemplate even 150 years later. Serena Altshuler went to the scene of the conflict for our Sunday morning cover story.
As the sun rose on these quiet Maryland farmlands on September 17, 1862, the bloodiest day in American history began.
And for 12 hours, these two determined armies tore into each other. And of course, if you average the casualties that day, a man fell on this field every 2 seconds during those 12 hours.
The battle started, says Antietam Ranger Keith Snyder, in a cornfield on the Miller farm just outside the town of Sharpsburg.
When the Union soldiers are moving through the corn, really all you could see was the bayonets glistening at the top of the corn, and the Confederates were about 100 yards south of that, just waiting for them to pop out. Obviously, it's tremendous confusion, the smoke, the fog, the noise.
General Robert E. Lee's armies, emboldened by a summer of victories, had crossed into Union territory for the first time, hoping that a victory here would end it all. Union soldiers, 90,000 of them, led by General George McClellan, were desperate to push them back.
Dear Mother, it is a misty, moisty morning.
One of those soldiers, Wilder Dwight, lieutenant colonel of the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry, began a hopeful letter to his mother as he waited for his unit to be called.
He was riding his horse right in this cornfield and says, "Mother, so far I am safe and well." And then if you look at this document, you can see that the handwriting suddenly changes.
Dearest Mother, I am wounded so as to be helpless. Dearest love to Father and all my dear brothers. Our troops have left the part of the field where I lay.
Rick Burns' documentary, Death in the Civil War, airs this week on PBS's American Experience. He says that deadly day at Antietam changed our country forever.
People brought to this Civil War remarkable romantic ideas about what war was, about the glory of death in the battlefield. But, you know, this is what death in the battlefield was. It was having, you know, your guts blown out by a shell. There was no glory to it. It was pure mayhem.
At midday, the battle moved south to this place, which would become known as Bloody Lane.
You could walk along the bodies on the sunken road,
yes.
Bloody Lane, without hitting bare ground.
And the image that conjures of Bloody Lane, you almost imagine blood running down this slope here.
And that's what people described.
By sunset, these once peaceful fields would be covered with bodies. 4,000 dead, 19,000 wounded, Union and Confederate soldiers both. The terrible reality of it brought home to the nation by a new invention, photography. When these photographs, taken 2 days after the fighting had stopped, were exhibited at Matthew Brady's studio in New York, they were front-page news. The public, says historian and Harvard University President Drew Faust, could no longer look away from the horror of war.
It was a stunning awakening for the civilian population of New York to see what was going on not all that far away.
According to Faust, death on this almost unimaginable scale transformed our nation.
There weren't burial details. There was not an ambulance service to remove the wounded or the dead from the field. Soldiers did not have any form of formal identity. There was no formal process for notifying next of kin. So if someone was killed, it was up to his comrades to write and tell his loved ones what had happened to him.
All this would change, by necessity, over the next few terrible years. What portion of the dead were unknown and unnamed in the end?
It's staggering.
It's probably about half of 750,000 lost. We don't know because the records are so incomplete. So it's unknown how many were unknown, but an estimated half.
It is now 4 weeks since we received a letter from my dear father and heard that he was very sick. And we have not heard a word since.
Will you please to inform me at your earliest convenience whether my son, Joseph H. Hampton, is alive or dead?
If you think of hundreds of thousands of individuals across the nation who never knew what happened to their son, their brother, their husband, it's almost unimaginable as a burden of grief.
The cost on both sides was staggering, but Lee's army had been pushed back, allowing the Union side to declare its first major victory. 5 days later, President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation.
It tied every bit of loss and suffering and commitment on the part of the North to what Lincoln, a little more than a year later, defines as a rebirth of freedom and a rededication to the notion that all men are created equal, and that is a part of our national identity.
After Antietam, no longer would this war be just about reunifying the nation. It is now going to be about freedom for 4.5 million Americans.
A purpose, says Ranger Keith Snyder, that gave meaning to the horror and the grief.
One soldier, his wife was so concerned about him marching off to war, she said, what are our children going to do? And he wrote to her and said, it would be better for the children to have a country without a father than a father without a country.
And a different understanding of what it means to be an American.
In an important sense, the country we are was born the day all those men died on these fields. It changed our government, changed our sense of what the duty government owes its citizens, especially those it puts in harm's way.
It would be at Gettysburg, 1 year and hundreds of thousands of deaths later, that Abraham Lincoln would articulate the challenge that lay ahead. That these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.